Politics 101C. The Masonic Revolution. Here we see the appearance and garb of a common couple of colonialist aristocrats. He wears a wig of white horsehair, she a lace collar, both frilled sleeves, she a corset and a hoop skirt, he a coat with tails, a cravat, silk vest and garters, etc. In short, they are dressed to the T's, in the latest fashions of Britain and France, and have an air of wit that attracts reverence about them. In short, they are fops. Here is how the Puritan commoner of the American colonists looked, most usually to these colonialist aristocrats. Charged in kangaroo courts with empty crimes such as witchcraft, alike the era of the Inquisition, the Puritan Christian lower-class serfs in the American colonies had little or no rights under British rule, and paid import taxes on all products so steep they were held in perpetual bankruptcy and converted to the level of debt slaves. This drastic class disparity finally came to an explosive head when a group of Freemasons dressed as Native Americans boarded a British ship in Boston Harbor and proceeded to unload its cargo into the harbor's water. This event, called soon afterwards the Boston Tea Party, sparked a revolutionary inspiration in commoners across the British colonies in America. Rallying around the cry of freedom with such slogans as, "Give me liberty or give me death," the commoner colonists were quickly rounded up and conscripted into a guerrilla-tactic, plain-clothes, irregular army, comprised of regiments of armed militias, under the leadership of General George Washington. In spite of slim odds resulting from unusually extremely cold weather conditions, Washington's troops, camped at Valley Forge, managed to cross the Potomac River to win one of the most decisive victories for the American colonists in the war against the British occupation. Washington, following the Revolutionary War, presided over the ratification and signing of the Constitution of the newly forming United States of America, and was present during many of the debates in the Continental Congress that shaped the future destiny of the American government into its eventual form as a representative democratic republic. Naturally, as one of the best generals during the American Revolution, George Washington was picked as the first president of the United States for his popularity with the people and for his close friendships with the other founding fathers. On his deathbed, George Washington was surrounded by many of the brightest minds alive at his time, and had helped with them to shape the history of a new nation into a form of democracy they believed could be preserved through long decades of intervening times yet to come. So who was this charismatic, wig-wearing American patriot who saw the value of defending democratic ideals like personal freedom and representative government as important enough to risk his own life on the battlefield to uphold as virtues? The general who would become the first president of the newly founded nation of the United States of America, George Washington, was, first and foremost, a free and accepted Mason. Seen here laying the cornerstone of the U.S. Capitol building, Washington wears the jewel and apron of a Master Mason, the third degree in the Blue Lodge of contemporary York Rite Freemasonry. Here we see the preserved cloth of George Washington's own actual Freemasonic apron, which he would have used to perform ceremonially in Freemasonic rituals. In this modern replica, we see the same Eye of Providence above the alphabet of other Masonic emblems, including Euclid's 47th, the square and compass, the black and white tiled floor, the twin pillars, the coffin and sprig of acacia, as were all seen originally on the Freemason apron of America's first president, General George Washington. But what does it mean for George Washington to have been a Freemason? Here we see him holding his hand inside his jacket while on the battlefield of the American Revolutionary War. Here we see a contemporary painting of Gilbert de Montier, Marquis de Lafayette, a commander general in the Continental Army who served during the Revolutionary War under General George Washington. Notice he is also holding his hand inside his vest beneath his coat. Lafayette was a French Freemason who also served as commander-in-chief of the French National Guard, and in that position attempted to quell the growing French Revolution by ordering his troops to fire on unarmed protesters. Contemporary to Lafayette's service during the French Revolution, we find this painting of a young Napoleon Bonaparte who had already acquired the habit of keeping one hand inside his jacket. Here seen later, painted during his time as Emperor of France, we see Napoleon maintain this peculiar habit of posture in all his portraiture poses, and held his hand inside his jacket as a general rule of habit. Interestingly enough, we see here in this photographic portrait of John Wilkes Booth, the assassin of U.S. President Abraham Lincoln, following the American Civil War, the same pose as in the others of George Washington, Lafayette, and Napoleon, with his hand tucked up inside his jacket. This pose, with the hand tucked into the front coat pocket, arm held at a right angle crook at the elbow, is a symbolic gesture used to convey a certain meaning during the ritual ceremonies performed by York Rite Blue Lodge Free and Accepted Masons. So, again, what does it mean for George Washington, the Revolutionary War general and first president of the United States of America, to have been a Freemason? It means that he, like the other founding fathers of the American nation who were also Freemasons, would be venerated by being carved and portrayed in stone, and his life would be commemorated by a massive megalithic monument. The statue of George Washington, housed in his Masonic monument, depicts him seated on a throne, covered by a toga, bare-chested, holding forth the handle of a sheathed sword in his left hand, and pointing up to the sky with his right forefinger. The pose of Washington's statue is meant to imitate a statue of Zeus, found during the Greek Golden Age in his temple on the Acropolis, and considered to be one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Its size was unrivaled besides the giant of Gibraltar. This Roman duplicate shows on a much smaller scale roughly what the statue's pose was, holding forth a lightning bolt in his right hand and pointing to himself with his left forefinger. The statue of George Washington clearly has the left hand offering the sword and the right hand pointing up toward heaven. However, as we may see on this ancient Greek coin, this posture may indeed have been the same as the original statue of Zeus, shown here bald and seated with a staff in his left hand and a bird above his right. The symbolism of depicting General Washington, who became the first president of the Democratic Republic of America, in the same posture as the ancient statue of Zeus, king over the pantheon of other gods, draws more than an allusion to the divine authority of the office in the form of Washington's offering the methods of war and peace to the onlooker. It also symbolizes the place of this office in the constellation of other roles played by the founding fathers, commemorated in stone as well. The painting in the oculus of the dome above the statue of George Washington in the pose of the Greek god Zeus in his Masonic monument shows Washington seated among a circle of angels in rationalist-era ultra-realism style. In this painting that rivals the concept of the Sistine Chapel ceiling frescoes by Michelangelo, we see Washington conversing with a round table of angelic hosts from below looking up, such that he appears to be floating on a ring of cloud above the onlooker at a round table meeting of angels. Most of the founding fathers and many of the earliest presidents following George Washington were Freemasons. The Boston Tea Party had been organized by Freemasons from the Green Dragon pub, which served also as a York Rite Lodge. Most of the signers of both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States were Freemasons. For these reasons, we will examine only a few of these famous men who have had their contributions to American history preserved in stone monuments in Washington, D.C., the federal capital of the USA. The quote that goes, "I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man," is attributed to the great deist philosopher of the American Revolutionary era, framer of the Constitution and author of the Bill of Rights, and Freemason, Thomas Jefferson. As we can see here, the Jefferson Memorial Building in Washington, D.C. sits with its front face of pillars and angled roof like a Spartan interpretation of the Athenian Acropolis architecture, facing the shore of the Potomac River. Inside the rotunda, beneath the exact oculus of the enormous domed roof of the Jefferson Memorial, is a huge statue of Thomas Jefferson, holding a rolled-up copy of a scroll meant to symbolize the U.S. Constitution. This statue is several times life-size scale and faces east to symbolize Jefferson's Masonic role as a light bringer. The enormous rotunda is surrounded by 4 walls containing etched sayings of Jefferson's, and above it is the oculus of the domed ceiling. Around the rim of the oculus's domed ceiling is written Jefferson's most famous saying, "I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man," that typifies his transcendentalist deism and flair for liberal democratic thinking. Other quotes by Jefferson adorn the walls of his memorial, such as this one dealing with the modernization and reinterpretation of constitutional laws, this one expressing his feelings on slavery and education, and this one stating unequivocally his passion for the right of freedom of expression. Next in our tour of the Founding Fathers' Masonic memorials in Washington, D.C., is this building, designed after the ancient temple of Zeus itself, called the Lincoln Memorial, built to honor the 16th U.S. President, Abraham Lincoln. As the Jefferson Memorial, the Lincoln Memorial also houses an enormous statue of its subject. However, while Jefferson's statue is metal and standing upright, Lincoln is carved from marble and sitting down. Above Lincoln is inscribed a dedication to him for saving the Union, referring to his role as President of the Northern Union States during the American Civil War against the Southern rebel Confederacy states. Like the Jefferson Memorial positioned on the shore of the Potomac River, the Lincoln Memorial is also positioned above water in the form of the long, narrow, man-made pond called the Reflecting Pool on the Great Mall of Washington, D.C. Because of this, as Lincoln's enormous statue faces west, he is always looking in the direction of the reflecting pool and, across it from the Lincoln Memorial, at the enormous stele of the Washington Monument. The stele of the Washington Monument is directly west from the Lincoln Memorial at the opposite end of the long reflecting pool, and, at an angle further to the west from the Washington Monument stele, is the Capitol building housing the Congress of the U.S. government. The Washington Monument is, like the separate Washington Masonic Monument, an enormous stele designed to resemble the so-called Cleopatra's Needle stele designs of ancient Egypt. The difference between the Washington Monument stele and the stele of ancient Egypt is that the Washington Monument is hollow and contains a staircase and elevator that ascend to the top. Here is a view from the top of the Washington Monument of the Lincoln Memorial at the opposite end of the reflecting pool. The orientation of the Lincoln Memorial to the Washington Monument forms a line along the long, narrow reflecting pool between them. At an angle from this line, beyond the Washington Monument, in a western direction, is the Capitol building, which serves as the location for the dual Senate and House of Representatives. The Washington Monument is shaped like an Egyptian stele, which were often used to measure changes in duration over the seasons of the length of the day by measuring the length of shadows cast by the stele at various points throughout the day. The role of the Washington Monument stele is similar, with the reflecting pool acting like an enormous mirror by which to place a stationary landmark for measuring the stele's shadow. The last Masonic founding father of the U.S. Democratic Republic, we will cover here briefly, does not have a memorial or monument built to him in Washington, D.C., however is often unrecognized for the contribution he was in the room during the designing of, that being the U.S. Great Seal itself, both front and back. It is possible the trenchard sketch for the eye atop the pyramid symbol was transmitted by Benjamin Franklin from the European Freemason lodges where the Illuminati had infiltrated to suppress Jacobinism, brought back by him as America's first French ambassador, and incorporated into the original designs for the Great Seal of the USA. We know that Franklin was an active Freemason, for he wrote about Masonry from the point of view of a Mason himself, and is thus remembered as not only one of the founding luminaries of the American Democratic Republic, but also a free-thinking scientific genius of the Age of Reason. Here we see a modern depiction of Benjamin Franklin in the same coat of Masonic dress as we are already now familiar with from seeing George Washington wearing it. The apron, the jewel, the surrounding symbols of the working tools of craft masonry all appear like the authentic art depicting George Washington in his garb and attire as a Freemason. However, this modern depiction of Benjamin Franklin dressed as a Freemason is a forgery, or rather, is plagiarized from another picture, which shows the same layout, but a different person at the focal point of the portrait than Franklin. This older and original painting shows not Ben Franklin, but the Marquis Lafayette. It is known Lafayette was a Freemason, along with Franklin and Washington, and we are reminded again of the connection between Lafayette and Washington, formed by Franklin, all of whom were Masons. Lafayette's peculiar pose, copied by Washington and Napoleon alike, may now be understood as a Masonic hailing sign signifying a special meaning known only to Freemasons. Because he is the most recognizable, most well-known, and most popularly liked of all of them, George Washington is seen as the preeminent Masonic president. However, in truth, he is not the only U.S. president to have been a Freemason. No fewer than 10 presidents, including Washington, have been confirmed to non-initiates as having been free and accepted Masons. Washington was first, but not last, among a long line of presidents who had advanced into Blue Lodge Masonry, most of whom went further on into the upper-level degrees of the York or Scottish Rites. Also, all of these presidents are distinguished in another way, which I will discuss more about soon, and that is that they all opposed central banking. The 33rd U.S. President, Harry Truman, is shown here in April and Jewel holding a gavel. There is every reason to believe and very little reason to doubt that all of the greatest men whose minds shaped the course of American politics between the eras of Washington and Truman were free and accepted Masons. Washington's being a Freemason seems to have set the standard that all ranking members of highest political offices must belong also to this popular esoteric order. The nature of Freemasonry remains, to this day, a secret society. However, many, if not most, of its so-called secrets are available in public publications and can be known even by a non-Mason, often more easily than even by some Masons. The doors, seen in this picture, leading to the inside of the Washington, D.C. Scottish Rite Temple, conceal many secrets, but most of them are about the men who were Freemasons in the past, and are only secrets because they would prove slightly controversial if revealed as being true instead of the official stories taught to and accepted by children as schoolbook history. There is, in short, nothing all too shocking behind the lodge door of Freemasonry. To scale the 3 steps up and to knock on the door is all that is required to gain entrance, because to become a Mason, all one must do is to ask a Mason how to do so. Once one is sponsored by a brother Mason, one is asked 3 questions. That is all it takes to qualify for the initiation ritual. However, because there is a reenactment of a death scene participated in by the blindfolded candidate of the 3rd degree ritual, Freemasonry is often misunderstood as teaching a dark-oriented or death-centered occultism. Nothing, to my experience, could be further from the truth. All the Masons I know now and have ever met are good men whom Masonry makes better, and are bound to keep secret only the topics they discuss in private within the lodge with other Masons. The teachings of Freemasonry are inherently good, being based on a study of the working craft tools of the stone masons who built the first temple in Jerusalem, overseen by King Solomon, son of King David. The concept of the divinity of monotheisms as the grand architect of the universe, the G in the square and compass symbolizing both God and geometry, precludes no other faiths from joining, and excludes no one who believes in any form of higher power or deity. Besides dressing up in costumes which would be difficult to explain the meanings of to children who might think them silly-looking, Masonry conceals no secrets for which any Mason could truly be ashamed for keeping. While the costumes worn by the Masons in a lodge working any given initiation degree level ritual may change over time, the basic principles of free and accepted Masonry do not. The 3 candles on the checkered floor and the altar with the Bible on it are the most important working symbols of craft Freemasonry's alphabet of speculative philosophical tools. The altar signifies the candidate's soul as a rough ashlar they must work to make perfect. The 3 candles on the checkerboard signify the fellowship of other Masons in a democratic system as the method of accomplishing this. Such is the meaning of the true and Masonic triumvirate conspiracy. Considering that so many of the greatest free thinkers among the most well-known and liked leaders of men have all belonged to the same cult of Freemasons, and had access to the same libraries of documents kept available only to Freemasons, it should come as no huge surprise to learn many men, from Isaac Newton to Neil Armstrong, have all been high-degree initiate Freemasons of their day. To become a Mason, ask a Mason how to do so. By this simple method has this brotherhood been promulgated across many ages and eras until it has reached even this modern day. If you want to learn more about the impact of Freemasonry on the free thinking of the U.S. Founding Fathers, simply ask any U.S. Mason for an answer, and they will tell you truly too.